Space. So, I guess you're here and ready and willing to be awake. And this is the conversation that is the awakening conversation. And it's just a way of settling into who we already are and seeing who we already are clearly. It's really, all of these great teachings on awakening, East and West, ancient and modern, are really, if they're worth their salt, giving us insight into what is often referred to as non-doing or undoing, that who we already are is perfect, and we're just skewing and not seeing who we are clearly. So the undoing kind of teaching is to get out of the way what's in the way of us seeing who we already are in this present moment. And so we're going to take a journey this morning into this deep inquiry, into really looking for our self-nature. But we're also going to be looking at the nature of war, since that's pretty much the hot topic on all of our minds, probably if we're tuning into world events, that the way of the world oftentimes is the war-based experience. And there's much to say on this. We find ourselves oftentimes picking sides, whether it's, a WWE wrestling match or a soccer game or two nations going at it in bloody combat. We tend to polarize. We tend to pick a side or a team and then go in full throttle into identifying only with the point of view of the team or the side or the nation that we've selected as the one that we choose to be right. And we neglect, ignore, or fall into misinformation and obscuration that keeps us feeling right and justified in having the side that we've picked. And the way that this happens is unconscious oftentimes. It's oftentimes fueled and spurned and spawned by conditioning, that we have a predilection towards a certain point of view, and then we find the side that more or less identifies or verifies that predilection. And so we're, as Gurdjieff would say, we're asleep. And when human beings are asleep, war is one of the effects of being asleep. So we're going to look at this today. We're going to look at it from a perspective of non-duality. Now, if you're familiar with the term non-duality, it literally just means not two-ness, right? We get the word non-duality really from the Sanskrit word that many of us have heard before, Advaita. Advaita means not two. Dvaita, dve is two, and is the negation of two. So not two. So you can't just say one, because that's not even accurate. There's no two-ness in reality. And reality is sanity. So looking at this whole idea of war from a non-dualist perspective would be that war equals insanity, because it is against the very fabric or nature of reality. And this goes right back to removing the obstacles and whatever's in the way of us seeing who we truly are. Who we truly are must be in relationship to reality. So we must also then be in a state of not two-ness when we're sane. That there is no duality in sanity. There's no us versus them in a sane mind. Only insanity can be at war. And when we are picking sides and finding this, justification for thinking others deserve attack, that becomes a way of not knowing ourselves. Now, I'm sure a lot of what we're going to be discussing this morning is going to hit home, and maybe it's also going to breed a little resistance, maybe resentment. And if you brought your rotten cabbage along, hit me. It's okay. It's happened before. We can go totally medieval if you want. But the facts remain the same. When you ignore your self-nature, you will be in a state of conflict. First and foremost, internally. So, as he says in A Course in Miracles, all interpersonal or international conflicts originate with intrapersonal conflict. In other words, you first must attack yourself and will not to know yourself. Then you can get in with everybody else who's doing that and pick an enemy. Because you first attacked yourself and took yourself out of the knowledge of not two-ness, out of the sanity of your higher self. Once you're in the insanity of your lower self, it's easy to pick the victim, victimizer, the right, the wrong, and the team that we are rooting for. But all of this is done under a state of delusion. So one of the things we really want to get clear on is there's going to be a part of your mind that doesn't agree with anything that I'm saying. There's a part of your mind that is so bought in and dug in to your opinions and your views and your justifications. And that is why we suffer. Because these opinions, views, and justifications are unexamined, truly. And this is, again, what's going to breed resistance. The unexamined points of view that we are unconsciously parroting and repeating are part of a conditioned complex of a self that is literally blocking reality from your awareness. And instead of trying to save the face of your ego in this conversation this morning, seek the face of God. Be willing to set aside your conditions and your complexes and your points of view and your justifications for murder and walk with me a little while down a peaceful path. Because what we're doing here is walking towards reality, walking towards what will truly make you happy and truly bring peace first intrapersonally and then to the rest. Because you can't give what you don't have. And that's what makes it really easy to pick a side in a battlefield. Because you're already in conflict. You're already upset, angry, confused, unstable, insane. So it's not a far leap to go into full-out savagery, at least in your thinking. So let's do this deep dive and inquiry this morning together as the non-dual self. Let's honor the noble one in you. Because that honoring of the true sacred self that you are will allow you to witness the resistance but not identify with it. It's going to be there, of course. It's part of the conditioning complex that you call yourself. It's got to be there. But you don't have to buy it and identify it, at least for this hour. You'll get to examine it, look at it, make an evaluation of it as to whether it's adding value to your life or not, and whether or not it's even accurate. It could just be a very sophisticated disinformation campaign that you've been playing on yourself in order not to have to look at your internal conflict and make it look as if some boogeyman is to blame for how you feel. So we're going to be looking at the Yoga Vashishta, which is one of the great non-dual teachings of ancient India. I have a really interesting story to tell you coming from the Yoga Vashishta. We'll be looking at Hafiz to start things off, and we'll add the cherry with A Course in Miracles. So let's begin then with Hafiz. This is entitled The Sane Idea. The Sane Idea. Let your intelligence begin to rule whenever you sit with others, using this sane idea. Leave all your cocked guns in a field, far from us. One of those damn things might go off. So he's talking about entering the circle of the Sufis, the circle of the Gnostics, the knowers, the ones who are seeking the face of God and defacing the ego. In order to do this, in order to experience the face of ultimate reality, your true self, your love and your peace and your joy and your abundance, leave your guns outside and come to this circle, this way of being in the conversation, this satsang, with no guns, no attack thoughts that you will be propping up inside of this circle, this sacred space. So leave your attack thoughts outside, because the sane idea is the idea that will bring you to the doorstep of reality or God. In order to go through that door and to actually go into the light of being and the heart of love, you have to, in the words of Jesus in A Course in Miracles, be totally harmless and utterly helpful. You can't enter reality if you harm life on any level, thought, speech, or action. And it's not because God is a bad guy or a bully. It's you're choosing to vibrate. You're choosing to identify with thoughts and speech and actions that literally propel you like the same polarity of a magnet to go away from the door into paradise. Remember, there are no victims because everyone is choosing what they are identifying with, the thoughts they think, the feelings they feel, the words they say, and the actions they make. It's all done by choice. Now, what is part of this difficulty or conundrum that sometimes we face is we're in an unconscious choice making. We're robotic. We're asleep. And so we're making these choices to side with certain teams and attack others unconsciously. So one of the purposes of this conversation is to brighten your attention and bring your attention to clearly look at the contents of your mind and the choices that you are currently making for yourself. That's a major intention here, is to promote self-inquiry, honest self-study, right? And one of the things that we will recognize is that we have been harboring attack thoughts. All of us. Are you kidding me? Number one right here. I mean, it gets so comical that I look at Lisa sometimes and, she'll point out like how I wanted to just murder the person who cut me off in traffic, or, something is going to trigger John, and John's going to feel justified in attacking it. It's what John does. See, your ego self, what you call yourself by your name, according to these esoteric or non-dual teachings, like A Course in Miracles, he actually says your ego is an attack thought. John is an attack thought. That's why John feels so at home in war. John lives in conflict. John's only way of maintaining his reality in my awareness is to have some kind of conflict or dis-ease going on. That's the only way John gets to breathe the fetid air of duality. So when the mind is peaceful and going into deep inquiry, it can step out of the character it's been playing in time. The time being, as Dogen would say. The time being is John. There's an eternal witness that can watch John and actually transform John from being an attack thought to being utterly harmless and totally helpful. John can become an instrument of peace. Let's just go with this one here. Spare the world your good ideas. Spare the world your ideas of good until you know all is good, my teacher said to me. Spare the world your ideas of right until you know that all is holy. So this is where your conditioning is going to fly up. What? But what about, there's this, there's him, there's her. Watch that. See, the reason why there are so few enlightened is because so many don't realize the level of the bamboozle. The veiling of your higher self is done with impulses and desires and aversions and visceral feelings. That's why we don't go through the door, because we think we are these feelings and desires and aversions, and that voice that is the one who identifies with the little self of this bucket of belief is saying, I don't feel that this is right. That's not you. That's the bamboozle. Now, as long as you're willing and wanting that, it's going to be your reality. And you will be in a state of inner and outer conflict. Your world will be a world at war. Somehow, some way, always. That is samsara. That is the round of endless rebirth. war. That's why he'll say not only is your separate self belief an attack thought, Jesus will say in A Course in Miracles that time is war. Time is war. Eternity is peace. What does that mean? It means that you'll never cease being at war as long as you believe you're the time being, a being originating in time and space and matter. That's why this conversation it is a quantum leap to a completely different platform of consciousness. We're going from duality to non-duality. You can't get there as the little self. That's why he'll say it beautifully. We talked about this in class on Thursday. You get tired of this aching and weary world, but you don't see a way out. There's no road that says God that way. Because even if you were to take those roads within the aching world, you're just ending up in another belief system based within the separate self, in time. And it will be maybe religious, but as you inquire into that, as many of us have, it starts to break down. It doesn't give you what you're looking for. There's no way out. It's just substituting one illusion with another illusion. But he says there is a way that the real world, the world of love and peace and eternity, can touch your mind. And that is, if you love it and call to it, it will answer. He says love always answers. We just have to stop long enough inside, end the conflict, leave the guns outside, no more attack thoughts in this moment. Clear a space. And then there's a part of the heart that already knows this, and we can get back into touch with that when the guns cease firing. And we're willing to set aside the conditioning and the impulses to split the mind and avoid looking intimately into who we really are. If we're willing to just breathe through whatever waves may be coming up, we can go into that still place for a moment and call with love. And that road out of this weary and aching world will start to show up for us. It will seed our awareness. And then we'll begin to gain an increasing understanding of who we really are and how insane it is to attack others. Remember, you can't enter sanity until you're utterly harmless. You know, in the East for centuries, for millennia really, the teachings of yoga and Vedanta, and also picked up much later by Gandhi, is, you know, the first step on this path is ahimsa, nonviolence, not harming life to the best of your ability. Because in order to find reality, you have to be harmless in thought, speech, and action. We in time, as these separate selves, have been in a cauldron of war for millennia. It's in our DNA. It's time that we begin to write a new history. Bring in a higher perspective and end this brutality. And it can only start and become real when you leave your attack thoughts outside. And no longer will you fall for the bamboozle internally, and therefore you'll see the bamboozle externally. It's a bamboozle. So this is a teaching coming from the Yoga Vashishta, and it's called The Great Forest. And the Yoga Vashishta, of course, is coming from a non-dual perspective. And it's basically saying that there's only pure consciousness, or God consciousness. That is the substance of reality. And when the mind gets caught in the passions of desire and hatred, it goes from being an integral part of the infinite God consciousness to a fragmented perspective. And it's then governed and ruled by these lower passions. You know, Plato said the same thing when he talked about the soul, that the soul originates in the higher realm of the pure ideas of God, the good, the one. And the soul drives its horses of passion and spirit, and passion begins to feed on the lower food within the lower world or the lower mind, and as a result, they lose their wings. The horses lose their wings, and the consciousness now is stuck in the lower world, and it can't get out. It's caught in the bog. And so Plato says the only way that you can grow your wings back is to love wisdom and seek reality through wisdom, through examining your life. And by doing that, you'll begin to peel back the layers that are keeping you stuck and trapped, and you'll begin to ascend in what Plato calls anamnesis. You begin to forgetting that you're the one. You begin to lose your amnesia. And you begin to realize your native natural state, which is in the non-dual God consciousness. And so the Yoga Vashishta, in many ways, is coming from that perennial understanding of the true nature of reality and what is required to come back. And very briefly here also, Vashishta is one of the immortal rishis or sages that originates in the Brahmic or the God consciousness and comes into the lower fields of planetary evolution to uplift humanity and speed them along in their return. So Vashishta is an immortal teacher, and he's teaching in this great treatise on yoga, Rama. And Rama, maybe you've known this too, is an incarnation of God. But he's a young boy in this story. So Vashishta is helping Rama remember who he is. And the Vashishta Yoga is all about telling stories and giving this memory back through story. So Vashishta says this: the pure mind is free from latent tendencies, and therefore it attains self-knowledge. Since the entire universe is within the mind, the notions of bondage and liberation are also within it. In other words, at your fingertips, at the moment of each thought, you're choosing to be in bondage, or you're choosing to liberate by your thoughts, your speech, and your actions. So this was a story that he heard, Vashishta heard from Brahma himself. There was a great forest, so large that millions of square miles were like the space within an atom. In it, there was just one person who had thousands of arms and limbs. He was forever restless. He had a mace in his hand with which he beat himself, and afraid of the beating, he ran away in panic. He fell into a blind well. He came out of it, again beat himself, and again ran away in panic, this time into a forest. He came out of it, again beat himself, and again ran away in panic, this time into a banana grove. Though there was no other being to fear, he wept and cried aloud in fear. He kept running as before, beating himself as before. I witnessed all this intuitively, and with the power of my will, I restrained him for a moment. I asked him, "Who are you?" But he was sorely distressed and called me his enemy, wept aloud and then laughed aloud. Right? Totally insane. Then he began to abandon his body limb by limb. Immediately after this, I saw another person running like the first one, beating himself, weeping and wailing. When I similarly restrained him, he began to abuse me and ran away intent on his own way of life. Like this, I came across several persons. Some listened to my words and, abandoning their previous way of life, became enlightened. Some others ignored me or even held me in contempt. Some others even refused to come out of the blind well or the dense forest. So now Vashishta goes on to explain what this story really is, much like Jesus does in the Gospels, where he tells a parable. And then later on, he'll tell the disciples the meaning behind the symbols. So Vashishta says this to Rama: "This great forest is not far away, nor is that strange man in a strange land. This world itself is the forest. It is a great void, but this void is seen only in the light of inquiry." The light of inquiry is the eye in the parable, the eye that stops the person from their insane self-abuse and asks, "Who are you?" That too is part of your consciousness, just like the insane person is part of your consciousness that is abusing itself. The person with thousands of arms is the mind, with countless manifestations. This mind punishes itself by its own latent tendencies and conditioning, and wanders restlessly in this world. Even when the light of wisdom shines on the life of the deluded mind, it foolishly rejects it, considering that that wisdom is its enemy. Then it weeps and wails in distress. Sometimes it experiences an imperfect awakening, but most of the time it chooses to stay asleep. Behold the play of ignorance, which makes one hurt oneself out of one's own volition, and which makes one run hither and thither in meaningless panic. Though the light of self-knowledge shines in every heart, yet one wanders in this world driven by one's own latent desires. And remember, these latent desires are part and parcel with the separate self complex, which is an attack thought. It's an attack thought because it's splitting your mind from the oneness of reality and having you, much like I can't think of the word now, when you're only seeing yellow. Anyway, it's like you're having a fever, and the mind will split and only see two-ness, where there really is oneness. That is a disease in the heart. according to these teachings. And it causes dis-ease in the mind and the body. And as long as the mind is under the influence of this fever, it will see itself in time and on some level in conflict, always. And if that's your level of identification, then the mind will also find in the outer world the witnesses, the media, the voices that will confirm and compound the conflict state, thus adding to the primal bamboozle and continuing it. So, liberation and bondage are literally a choice away from you, always, every moment. And everyone is doing the attacking to themselves. And then put themselves in an environment where they can see their own attack thoughts playing out in form. That's what's one of the hardest things to swallow in this teaching of non-duality. Because either God is insane to create such a world where war exists and devastation and brutality and an endless conflict within and without. What kind of God would that be? That would be a demon God. Think about it. I mean, we're insulated in this country quite nicely, and our news, for the most part, is so sanitized. But drop yourself into, Ukraine right now. What kind of God would sanction that if the God was all powerful and truly loving? So either God is insane or the ego is insane. And you, as the decision maker, are choosing between one or the other every instant. You're either saving the face of your ego in this moment and perpetuating internal and external war, and thus hitting yourself, clubbing yourself, and then getting into a panic because of your own self-attack. And because it's such a delusion, you're giving rise to the forms in consciousness that will confirm to you that you're not doing this to yourself. This is happening out there. And I get to use my magic of projection to give a face to the savage within and make it look like there's the savage without that's responsible for all of this war. Whether it's, again, you're picking sides, or maybe even you're seeing the deeper game or bamboozle when you follow the money in this regard. Even those more hidden forces that are playing chess with both sides, like Vince McMahon, who owns World Wrestling Foundation, has the good and the evil characters playing within the arena, and he's the CEO who's in charge of both sides and owns the media that gives you the play. Yeah, Hulk Hogan! Yeah! And that's what we are. We're the yokels with no teeth in the audience. Yeah. 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 Stick it to Russia. Okay, $25 extra at the pump. Well, that's all right. Come on. You're wiser than this. It's a bamboozle. But the thing is you don't want to even make attack thoughts for Vince McMahon and his ilk. That's how you get out of it. You got to see it. You got to see that it's not the duality that's being shown to you as the yokel. It's bigger. It's more hidden, more sinister. But you get to see it for what it is and then realize it's only in my mind. And it can only hook me because of my own attack thoughts. My consciousness is sovereign. And if I'm asleep at the wheel, I'll be bamboozled. And I'll get a hook in my nose, and I'll be led along the ride of time and war. Because I'm choosing it. Or I can liberate. Another choice. Is this making sense? And sense is really the appropriate term here. Because in this teaching, he injects new meaning into these old theological symbols. And so one of the ways that he'll inject new meaning is on this second coming of Christ idea. The second coming of Christ, as it's defined in A Course in Miracles, is the return to sense, sanity, seeing clearly with the vision of the non-dual self, and thus rising above the battleground. You come out of the war. Come out of the war. Even if you're an armchair warrior, stop it. It's a bamboozle that you're playing on yourself. So in this section, in the Course, it's above the battleground. That's the title of this section. He starts off by saying, is it not true you do not recognize some of the forms attack can take? You're not aware of all the forms that attack can take. If it is true attack in any form will hurt you, and will do so just as much as in another form which you do recognize, then it must follow that you do not always recognize the source of pain. Now, one of the things you have to remember that now is if you want to go through the door of non-duality or the door into reality, you have to be totally harmless and totally helpful, universally compassionate, right? So attack in any form is going to bar your way. Remember, I'm talking to myself first. I have a PhD in attack. I'm very skillful in attacking. Trust me. Hang out with me for a little while. I hate all of yous. He said the quiet part out loud. But here, to be totally harmless is to give up attack in any form. Because attack, even in its more sophisticated forms, is going to bring you pain. Remember that character, if you ever watched the Harry Potter series? She had all the cat plates, and she was dressed like the perfect grandma with the pearls and the coiffed hair, and very sweet and giggly, and she was the most ruthless character in the series. Terrible woman. Enjoyed pain. Enjoyed giving people pain. Total sociopath. And yet, at first glance, the sweetest thing you've ever laid your eyes on, a grandma with cat plates and embroidery. And yet, underneath that appearance, vileness. So attack in any form is going to equal pain. So then he says, its purpose does not change. Its sole intent is murder. So this is what we don't often understand when we have an attack thought. We were joking earlier about a guy cutting me off in traffic. That son of a bitch. Right there, that thought, I murdered him in my mind. And guess what? Just by that quick flash of thought, I'm literally calling for pain to come to me because of the power of my mind. I'm the white wizard and I'm the dark wizard. My choice. And I will marshal the forces of creation to bring to me what I'm asking for. My trouble is, I'm not always aware of what I'm asking for. So when I'm in pain and suffering and upset, I don't realize I'm the one who caused it by my attack thoughts. But remember, I'm kind of limping here. I got a handicap because I think I'm John. And John is an attack thought. And in order for John to survive, John needs conflict. So John wants people to cut him off in traffic. John needs it. This is what the bamboozle, we don't get the level of the bamboozle. We're the helpless one on the surface, the puppeteer. And what's really controlling John and put John within the awareness is in the subconscious, deeper than I'm willing to look or go. And that subconscious mind, as Freud rightly pointed out, is actually really what's running the show. So, the sole intent is murder, and what form of murder serves to cover the massive guilt and frantic fear of punishment the murderer must feel? So, he'll say elsewhere in this section that whatever is not love is murder. I mean, that really gave me pause when I first considered the impact of that. Whatever is not love is murder. In other words, I'm either in reality and sanity, or in my awareness, I'm murdering that, blocking it, cutting myself off, and choosing to go into self-punishment and total insanity. And then look out there for the reason why. So he goes on, speaking of our collective condition here with the pronoun he, which means we. He may deny he is a murderer and justify his savagery with smiles as he attacks. Who hasn't done that? Yet he will suffer and will look on his intent in nightmares where the smiles are gone and where the purpose rises to meet his horrified awareness and pursue him still. For no one thinks of murder and escapes the guilt the thought entails. If the intent is death, what matter the form it takes? Then he says this course is easy just because it makes no compromise. Do you see, in the Upanishads of ancient India, it said walking this path into your true self is a razor's edge. It's a razor's edge. Again, why are the mass of humanity not enlightened? Because we all like to compromise. We all do. We give validation to why we should murder somebody in our mind. I think we've all been murdering this week, haven't we? Who hasn't been murdering? Raise your hand. You disgust me. You bunch of murderers. So you see then, there can be no compromise. Yet it seems difficult to those who still believe that compromise is possible. There's a good side and there's a bad side. No, there ain't. Not in this world. Do your inquiry. Really look. Don't look to your witnesses that are on your team, because they'll just lull you to sleep and give you what you need to fuel your belief that you're right. And they'll leave out all the ugly parts about your team. That would actually bring a more mature and seasoned perspective that will get you out of the conflict and see what's really going on. And then you can then forgive that, because you've also generated the behind the scenes that are controlling both sides. Then the gig is up. But you can't compromise. As soon as you compromise, your wisdom is eclipsed and you can't see the bamboozle. Yet it seems difficult to those who still believe that compromise is possible. They do not see that if it is, salvation is attack. So look at how we've redefined many of our religions. They're based in sacrifice and crucifixion. In order to be saved, you got to believe on this bloodied person that's been attacked. And God did that in Christianity. God brutalized Jesus because he loves us so much. Forgiveness cannot be withheld a little, nor is it possible to attack for this and love for that and understand forgiveness. Would you not want to recognize assault upon your peace in any form? If only thus does it become impossible that you lose sight of it. It can be kept shining before your vision forever clear and never out of sight if you don't try to defend your peace. Remember, because that's when John's going to come in, or your character in time. You got to let that go. You're not your character. That's really the linchpin in the bamboozle. As soon as you're willing to step back from being your character, you'll start to see much more clearly. Those who believe that peace can be defended and that attack is justified on its behalf cannot perceive that attack lies within them. How could they know? Could they accept forgiveness side by side with the belief that murder takes some forms by which their peace is saved? Murdering people is wrong. So let's go murder those people who are murdering people. That'll make it right. Now watch your conditioning. See, the other thing is your character is going to, but what about? Your character needs conflict. And will see these ideas, like in the story, as the enemy. There's no road out of the world of war until you call with love and become totally harmless. And when somebody really embodies ahimsa, they undo the chains of empire. We saw that happen once in our generation, in our historic purview. Once somebody was brave enough to truly embody nonviolence. And the power that was generated literally broke the chains of empire. Because there was nothing to attack. Empire needs an enemy to attack. If you're not going to play that role anymore, you're an anomaly in the matrix. So you can't protect your peace by murdering. It's insane. Would they be willing to accept the fact that their savage purpose is directed against themselves? So whenever you buy into that formula, that murder equals, or war equals peace, which, by the way, was one of the platitudes of George Orwell's 1984. War is peace. Ignorance is knowledge. That you're not willing to accept the fact that when you say war equals peace, that your savage purpose is actually directed against you. You're asking for pain when you equate war with peace, murder with peace. And no one compromises with an enemy but hates him still for what he kept from him. Mistake not truce for peace, nor compromise for the escape from conflict. Right? This is for you, because the other thing that the little self will do is the but what about ism. Got to deflect this idea. It's getting too dangerously close. I might actually have to give up my control over this mind that's listening to these ideas right now. That's not going to be, I'll be homeless. I'll be wandering away from this host. The parasite will get washed out. So the but what about ism, that's a good one. Somebody else is doing it. Why can't I? Seems to be working over there. So he says, to be released from conflict means that conflict is over in your mind. You're done. You want to be harmless now. The door is open. You've left the battleground. You have not lingered there in cowering hope that the battle will not return because the guns are stilled an instant and the fear that haunts the place of death is not apparent. There is no place of safety in a battleground. There's no safety in your little self-identity. You'll never feel at home. You'll never be free from anxiety because it is the neurotic thought that's at war with reality. As long as you show up as your character, you're on the battleground and you'll get hooked into the propaganda of war. Finally here, you are not asked to fight against your wish to murder, but you are asked to realize the form it takes conceals the same intent. So inquire and look. Look at how your wish for murder shows up in your world and how you acquiesce and validate murder in all of the forms that it takes for you. Witness it. You don't have to judge yourself for it, but do become aware of it. How many times a day are you murdering? And it is this you fear. The intent, not the form. What is not love is murder. What is not loving must be an attack. Every illusion is an assault on truth, and every one does violence to the idea of love because it seems to be of equal truth. What can be equal to the truth, yet different? Murder and love are incompatible. One denies the existence of the other. Yet if they both are true, then they must be the same and indistinguishable from one another. So will they be to those who see God's self as a body. For it is not the body that is like the child of God that God created. What is lifeless cannot see the child of life. So Blue Bag's going to go around and love to hear from you guys. If that's you, you want to share something, Joe has a cordless mic that he'd like to give you so the folks on Facebook can listen along. Don't be shy. If you are joining us on Facebook, remember you can also donate to the service today by clicking the link below, and the church and I greatly appreciate your support. Thank you. Let's bless the offering. It's with gratitude that we honor the gift, and we charge it with the intention that it be a light in this world and bring peace to the hearts and minds that it touches in whatever form it takes. And so it is. Amen. Okay. You can pick up your 6 guns when you get out of here. They'll still be on the counter. And take your spurs and head out that door. Back to the battle. Or not. Thank you for going on this ride with me this morning. So let's close out with the unity prayer. Can stand, settle within that deeper state within the heart, being the witness and not the mask. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Course in Miracles, tomorrow night, 7:15 in the classroom. Have a wonderful day, everybody. We'll see you again soon.